The blood on Lila Mercer's hands wasn't hers, not this time. She scrubbed them raw in the train station washroom, watching pink water swirl down the drain, same as it had every night for 3 months. The bruises had faded. The fear hadn't. When the telegram came offering work at a Montana ranch, Baker needed, isolation guaranteed, no questions asked, she didn't hesitate. She bought a one-way ticket with money she'd stolen from a man who'd never let her leave alive. Now, stepping onto the platform in Silver Ridge, she carried one carpet bag, a set of burns hidden beneath her sleeves, and the certain knowledge that if Evan Rourke ever found her, running wouldn't save her twice. Before we begin Lila's journey toward redemption and the family she never knew she deserved, I invite you to join me for this complete story. If it moves you, please leave a like and comment with your city. I love seeing how far these frontier tales travel. Now, let's step into the Montana wilderness of 1887, where bread, silence, and second chances are about to collide. The wagon that met Lila at Silver Ridge Station wasn't driven by Caleb Hart. A grizzled man with tobacco-stained whiskers and eyes like chips of flint sat hunched on the bench seat, reins loose in his weathered hands. He looked Lila up and down with the assessing gaze of someone inspecting livestock, then spat a stream of brown juice that landed dangerously close to her worn boots. "You the baker?" Lila straightened her shoulders, feeling the familiar weight of judgment settle over her like a yoke. "I am." He jerked his head toward the wagon bed. "Toss your bag in back. Name's Hewitt. I run the bunkhouse crew." She climbed up beside him without assistance, noting how he deliberately didn't offer a hand. The wagon lurched forward, wheels crunching over frozen mud as they left the small collection of buildings that comprised Silver Ridge behind. The November landscape stretched vast and unforgiving in every direction. Rolling grassland already gone bronze with winter's approach, mountains rising like broken teeth against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The wind carried the scent of sage and distance, and something else Lila couldn't name. Space, maybe. The kind of emptiness that either freed you or swallowed you whole. "Mr. Hart know you're a woman?" Hewitt asked after 20 minutes of silence, broken only by the creak of wood and harness leather. "The telegram didn't specify gender requirements," Lila said carefully. "Only baking skills." Hewitt worked his jaw, considering. "Well, he's going to know soon enough. Ranch is 2 hours out. Got time to set you straight on a few things." Lila waited, hands folded in her lap, while Hewitt gathered his thoughts like a man preparing to deliver unpleasant medicine. "Caleb Hart is a hard man," he said finally. "Not cruel, mind you, but hard. Lost his wife, Isabel, 2 years back. Terrible thing. Left him with a little girl, Maggie, she's 4 now, and a ranch that nearly went under while he was drowning in grief." He shot Lila a sidelong glance. "You got experience with children?" "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Good. Don't get any ideas about it neither. Your job is bread, biscuits, whatever else comes out of an oven. You stay in the kitchen, you stay out of the house proper, and you sure as hell stay away from that child. Caleb's been real clear on that point." Something cold settled in Lila's chest. "Why?" "Ain't your concern. You do your work, you'll have a roof over your head and wages every month. You step outside those lines, you'll be on the next train back to wherever you came from." Hewitt's voice gentled slightly. "Look, I don't know what you're running from, and I don't care to know, but this is a good place for folks who want to disappear into honest work. Don't complicate it." Lila turned her face toward the endless prairie, watching hawks circle in the distance. "I'm not here to complicate anything. See that you remember it." The Hart Ranch appeared gradually, materializing from the landscape like something inevitable. First the fence lines, wires strung between weathered posts that marched over hills in geometric defiance of the land's natural curves. Then the outbuildings, a barn that had seen better decades, a bunkhouse with smoke rising from its chimney, corrals where horses stood hip-shot in the thin sunlight, and finally, the house itself. It was larger than Lila expected, 2 stories of timber and stone that looked like it had grown from the earth rather than been built upon it. A wide porch wrapped the front and one side, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, Lila caught a glimpse of a small figure standing at an upstairs window. Then the curtain fell, and the child was gone. "That's the main house," Hewitt said, following her gaze. "Your quarters are attached to the kitchen, separate entrance. You'll take your meals with the hands in the bunkhouse, except breakfast. You'll need to be cooking that before the rest of us are awake." He pulled the wagon up beside a side door that clearly led to the kitchen wing. Before Lila could climb down, the main door opened and a man stepped out onto the porch. Caleb Hart stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and lean, in the way of men who worked hard and ate sparingly. His face was all harsh angles, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked carved from granite, and eyes the color of storm clouds that assessed Lila with the same flat intensity Hewitt had shown. But where Hewitt's scrutiny had been dismissive, Caleb's gaze carried weight, like he was measuring not just her competence but her potential to cause harm. His dark hair needed cutting, and exhaustion shadowed the skin beneath those gray eyes. He wore work clothes gone soft with wear, canvas pants, a chambray shirt, boots that had seen 1,000 miles. No wedding ring, Lila noticed, though a pale band of skin on his left hand suggested he'd worn one until recently. "You're the baker." Not a question. "Lila Mercer." She met his eyes steadily, years of practice keeping her voice level. "Your telegram said room and board plus $30 a month." "It did." He moved down the porch steps with the economical grace of someone who never wasted motion. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his temples. "Can you bake?" "Yes." "How many men?" "I've cooked for households of 20. Your telegram said 12 hands plus yourself." Caleb nodded slowly. "Kitchen's through that door. You'll find it needs work. Previous cook left it in poor condition. I expect breakfast by 5, dinner at noon, supper at 6, bread daily. You're responsible for inventory. Make a list of what you need and give it to Hewitt every Saturday. He'll bring supplies back from town on Mondays." "Understood." "One more thing." His voice dropped, taking on an edge that made Lila's spine stiffen. "You see a little girl around the place, dark hair about this high. You walk the other direction. You don't speak to her. You don't acknowledge her. You sure as hell don't try to mother her. She's not your concern. Are we clear?" The words landed like blows, each one precise and meant to wound. Lila felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her expression neutral. "Perfectly clear." "Good." He turned back toward the house, then paused. "Hewitt says you're running from something. I don't care what. Do your work, keep to yourself, and we'll have no problems." He disappeared inside before Lila could respond. Not that she had words for the complex tangle of shame and relief and anger his dismissal provoked. Hewitt cleared his throat, cleared his teeth. "I'll bring your bag to your room. You'll want to see the kitchen before dark." The kitchen was a disaster. Lila stood in the doorway, taking in the wreckage of neglect and incompetence with a sinking heart. Grease coated every surface, thick as butter. The massive cast-iron stove was caked with burned-on food, its surface a landscape of carbon deposits. The work table in the center of the room bore scars from knives used directly on the wood, and the shelves that should have held organized supplies were a chaos of half-empty sacks, rusted tins, and what appeared to be mouse droppings. The floor was worse. Sticky with spilled grease and tracked-in dirt, it squelched under Lila's boots as she moved deeper into the space. But beneath the filth, she could see potential. The stove, once cleaned, would be magnificent, big enough to bake a dozen loaves at once. The pantry was generous, even if it currently housed more cobwebs than food. And the windows, tall, south-facing windows, would flood the room with light come morning. Lila set down her carpet bag and rolled up her sleeves. She'd brought 2 spare dresses, 1 shawl, undergarments, and a slim leather case that held the only things that mattered: her mother's handwritten recipe book, a small tin of sourdough starter that had crossed 2 states in her coat pocket, and a set of burns on her forearms that she kept carefully hidden. Now she added another possession to her inventory: work. The kind of work that erased everything else. The kind that left no room for memory or fear or the phantom sensation of hands that grabbed too hard. By lamplight, she scrubbed. Hours blurred together in a rhythm of hot water, lye soap, and the rough whisper of bristles against iron. Her hands, already scarred from years of burns and cuts, cracked and bled anew. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because Evan had always said she was worthless outside of what she could do for him, and the only way to prove him wrong, to prove she deserved the space she occupied, was to make this kitchen clean. She was on her hands and knees, attacking the floor with a scrub brush when she heard it. A small sound, barely there. Lila froze, water dripping from her raw knuckles. Slowly, she turned her head toward the interior door, the one that led to the main house. In the gap between door and frame, at about knee height, a pair of dark eyes watched her. The child didn't move, didn't speak, just stared with an intensity that seemed far too old for someone so small. In the lamplight, Lila could make out a pale face framed by dark hair and small hands gripping the door frame like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to the earth. "Hello," Lila said quietly. The eyes blinked. Once, twice. "I'm Lila. I'm going to be baking here." No response. But the child didn't flee either. Lila sat back on her heels, brush still in hand. Every instinct told her to ignore Caleb's orders, to reach out, to coax this silent little soul into conversation. But she'd learned the hard way that good intentions meant nothing if they resulted in punishment. She couldn't afford to lose this position, couldn't afford to be sent back out into a world where Evan might be waiting. "You should go back to bed," Lila said gently. "It's late." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, like a ghost dispersing with the dawn, the child was gone. The door remained open just a crack, but the watching eyes had vanished. Lila returned to scrubbing with hands that trembled slightly, though whether from exhaustion or the weight of those silent, searching eyes, she couldn't say. She worked until the sky outside the windows began to pale from black to gray, until her back screamed and her knees felt like they'd been driven through with nails. Only then did she allow herself to stop, to survey what she'd accomplished. The kitchen gleamed. Not perfect, there were stains too deep to eradicate, damage too permanent to undo, but clean. Fundamentally, honestly clean. The kind of clean that said someone cared about the space and the work that would happen within it. Lila found her small room off the kitchen, barely bigger than a closet, but it had a narrow bed, a washstand, and a hook for her dresses. She collapsed onto the mattress without bothering to undress, and sleep took her like a stone dropping into deep water. She woke to the smell of coffee. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was back in Chicago, in the apartment above the bakery where she'd worked before Evan. Then reality crashed back, the ache in her muscles, the unfamiliar sounds of a ranch waking up, the knowledge that she was alone in Montana with nothing but her skills and her secrets. Lila dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, splashed frigid water on her face, and returned to the kitchen. Someone, Hewitt probably, had started the stove and left a pot of coffee warming. She poured herself a cup, black and strong enough to strip paint, and stood at the window watching the sun break over the eastern mountains. Then she began to bake. Her hands moved through the familiar rhythms without conscious thought, measuring flour by weight and feel, working the sourdough starter she'd kept alive through 3 months of running, kneading dough until it went from shaggy and resistant to smooth and alive beneath her palms. The motion was meditation, prayer almost, though Lila had long since stopped believing anyone was listening. But she believed in bread, believed in the alchemy of flour, water, salt, and time, believed that honest work produced honest results, and that a well-made loaf could say things that words couldn't. I am here. I am capable. I am worth the space I occupy. By 5 o'clock, she had biscuits coming out of the oven, golden, flaky, split, and ready for butter. Bacon sizzling on the stovetop, eggs scrambled with cream and black pepper, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The hands filed in like soldiers to mess, dusty and quiet, smelling of horses and leather. They filled tin plates without ceremony, eating standing up or hunched on benches, too tired or too hungry for conversation. A few nodded to Lila. Most ignored her entirely. Caleb didn't appear. After the men had eaten and dispersed to their morning work, horses to feed, fences to check, cattle to move, Lila began cleaning up. She was elbow-deep in dishwater when she heard small footsteps on the stairs. "Don't turn around," she told herself. "Not your concern." But she'd glimpsed the child through the interior door, and the image had lodged in her chest like a splinter. A little girl in a nightgown too big for her frame, descending the stairs with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to move silently, who'd learned that drawing attention was dangerous. Lila knew that walk, had perfected it herself. "There's biscuits left," she said without turning around. "And jam. On the table." Silence. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, the whisper of bare feet on clean floorboards. Lila kept washing dishes, keeping her back to the room, giving the child space to decide. She heard the scrape of a plate, the soft sound of chewing. Then, after several long minutes, footsteps retreating back up the stairs. When Lila finally turned around, the plate was empty except for crumbs. And beside it, laid with careful precision, sat a single wildflower, half crushed, probably picked days ago, but chosen and offered nonetheless. Something cracked in Lila's chest. She picked up the flower, a late-blooming aster, purple petals gone papery with age, and tucked it into her apron pocket. Then she returned to work, blinking hard against the sudden sting in her eyes. The days developed a rhythm. Wake before dawn, start the stove, bake bread while the world was still dark, feed the hands, clean, prepare dinner, feed the hands, clean, prepare supper, feed the hands, clean, sleep, repeat. Between meals, Lila transformed the kitchen. She organized the pantry, discarding anything spoiled or weevil-infested, making careful lists of what they'd need. She scrubbed the shelves until they shone. She oiled the work table, restoring some dignity to its scarred surface. She even tackled the root cellar, hauling out rotted vegetables and scrubbing down the stone walls until they no longer smelled like death. The hands began to notice. "Bread's good," said the cowboy named Chen one morning, his accent carrying the music of Cantonese beneath the English. "Real good. Best we've had." "Apple pie yesterday was something," added a freckled kid named Tommy, who couldn't be more than 16. "Ma used to make pie like that." Hewitt said nothing, but Lila caught him taking an extra biscuit when he thought no one was looking. Caleb remained absent from meals, taking his food in the main house. But twice, Lila glimpsed him through the windows. Watching the men work, his face set in lines of permanent tension, like a man holding himself together through sheer force of will. And every morning, after the hands had eaten and left, the little girl appeared. She never spoke, never acknowledged Lila directly. But she came, descending the stairs in her too large nightgown, and she ate whatever Lila left on the table, sometimes biscuits with honey, sometimes thick slices of bread with butter. Once, a leftover cinnamon roll that made the child's eyes go wide with something that might have been joy. And always, she left something behind. Flowers at first, then a smooth river stone, a feather, a button that looked like it had come from a fancy dress, small treasures carefully chosen, laid beside empty plates like offerings to a silent god. Lila kept them all in a tin she'd found in the pantry, hidden behind the flour sacks where no one would see. She told herself it didn't mean anything, that she was just doing her job, feeding the people on this ranch, no different from feeding the hands. But late at night, lying in her narrow bed, she'd think about those dark, watching eyes and feel something dangerous unfurl in her chest. Hope, maybe, or the memory of what it felt like to be seen and not punished for it. 2 weeks into her tenure, a storm rolled in from the north. Lila had never experienced weather like this, the way the temperature plummeted in hours, the wind that came screaming down from the mountains like something alive and furious. By noon, snow was falling so thick she couldn't see the barn from the kitchen window. "It's a bad one," Hewitt said, shaking snow from his hat as he stomped into the kitchen for dinner. "Caleb's got the men bringing the herd down to the near pasture. We'll lose some, but hopefully not many." "Will they make it back before dark?" Lila ladled stew into bowls, adding extra cornbread to compensate for the cold burning through the men's reserves. "Should. If not, they'll shelter in the line shack up north." He accepted his bowl gratefully. "You'll be all right here. Storm might last a few days." "I'll be fine." But after the hands had eaten and trudged back into the howling wind, after she'd banked the stove and prepared what she could for the next day, Lila stood at the window and felt the isolation of this place settle over her like a shroud. Miles of empty land in every direction, no neighbors, no town close enough to reach in a storm, just her and the man who barely acknowledged her existence and the child she was forbidden to comfort. Night came early, the sky going black by 4 o'clock. Lila lit lamps against the darkness and tried not to think about how the wind sounded like voices screaming, like all the things she'd run from catching up at last. She was kneading dough for tomorrow's bread, the repetitive motion calming her jangled nerves, when she heard it. A child's scream, high and terrified, coming from the main house. Lila froze, flour dusting her hands white. Not your concern. Stay away from the child. Another scream, sustained this time, raw with pure animal fear. Lila's hands moved before her mind caught up. She wiped them on her apron and ran for the interior door, throwing it open and taking the stairs two at a time. The screaming was coming from a room at the end of the hall, door ajar, lamplight spilling out. She found Maggie curled in the corner beside her bed, nightgown soaked with sweat, screaming at something only she could see. Her eyes were open, but unfocused, locked on some internal horror. Maggie. Lila dropped to her knees, keeping her voice low and calm despite the adrenaline singing through her veins. Maggie, you're safe. You're home. You're safe. The child didn't respond, just kept screaming, hands clawing at the air like she was fighting off an attacker. Lila had seen this before. Night terrors that trapped you between sleep and waking, where reality dissolved and the monsters became real. She'd suffered them herself after leaving Evan, waking in strange hotel rooms, convinced his hands were around her throat. I'm going to touch you now, she said quietly. Just your hands, okay? Just your hands. She reached out slowly, carefully, and took Maggie's small hands in her own scarred ones. The child's skin was fever hot, her pulse racing like a trapped bird's. Feel my hands? Lila squeezed gently. Feel that? You're here. You're real. You're safe. Gradually, so gradually Lila thought she might be imagining it, the screaming quieted. Maggie's eyes focused, finding Lila's face in the lamplight. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. It's okay, Lila murmured. You don't have to talk. Just breathe. In and out. Can you do that with me? She exaggerated her breathing, slow and deep, and after a moment Maggie began to mirror her. In, out, in, out. The child's pulse slowed under Lila's fingers. That's good. You're doing so good. Lila had no idea how long they sat there on the floor, breathing together in the lamplight while the storm raged outside. Time lost meaning. There was only the child's hands in hers, and the gradual return of reason to those dark, terrified eyes. Finally, Maggie's breathing evened out completely. She looked at Lila with an expression that mixed exhaustion and wonder, like she couldn't quite believe someone had come when she screamed. Let's get you back in bed, Lila said gently. Maggie allowed herself to be lifted. She weighed almost nothing, and tucked back under quilts that smelled like lavender. Lila smoothed the dark hair back from her damp forehead, and Maggie's eyes tracked her every movement with that same intense focus she'd shown that first night in the kitchen doorway. I'll stay until you fall asleep, Lila promised. If you want. Maggie's hand emerged from beneath the quilts and reached for Lila's. Small fingers wrapped around scarred ones and held tight. So Lila sat on the edge of the bed, holding the hand of a child she'd been ordered not to touch, and watched her slip back into sleep. The wind howled, the house creaked, and somewhere in the darkness, Lila felt the foundations of her careful rules begin to crack. She was trying to extract her hand without waking Maggie when she felt the presence in the doorway. Caleb stood silhouetted against the hall light, his face unreadable in shadow. How long he'd been there, Lila had no idea. Long enough to see everything, probably. She carefully freed her hand and stood, bracing herself for the anger she was certain would come. For being fired. For being sent back out into the storm with nothing but her carpet bag and her foolish heart. But Caleb didn't speak. He just looked at her, and then at his sleeping daughter, and something in his expression crumbled. She has them every night, he said, so quietly Lila almost missed it. The nightmares, since Isabel died, His voice broke. I don't know how to help her. Lila moved toward the door, giving him space to enter his daughter's room. She just needed someone to bring her back, someone to remind her where she was. I try, but when I touch her, she just screams louder. The defeat in his voice was absolute. Like I make it worse. You don't make it worse. Lila stopped in the doorway, close enough now to see his face clearly. The exhaustion carved into every line, the helplessness of a man who'd moved mountains but couldn't chase away his child's demons. She's just trapped in the fear. Sometimes it helps to have someone else pull you out of it. And you know this how? Experience. The word hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them would voice. Caleb nodded slowly. Thank you for... He gestured toward the bed where Maggie slept, peaceful now. I told you to stay away from her. You could have. I know. But you didn't. No. He studied her face for a long moment, and Lila met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away first. Let him see what he needed to see. Let him make his decision. The bread you've been leaving on the porch, Caleb said finally. That's for her, isn't it? Yes. And the flowers that keep appearing in her room, those are from you too. Lila blinked, surprised. No, those are from her. She leaves them in the kitchen after breakfast. I thought she was... She trailed off, realization dawning. She's been taking them back to her room? Something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched Caleb's mouth. Apparently. They stood in the doorway, the storm raging outside, and for the first time since Lila had arrived, Caleb Hart looked at her like she was something other than a problem to be managed. You can go back to the kitchen, he said. I'll sit with her the rest of the night. Lila nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the top of the stairs. Lila? She looked back. The bread is good, really good. Best we've had in years. A pause. I should have said that sooner. Thank you. And about staying away from Maggie. He rubbed a hand over his face, suddenly looking every one of his 35 years, and then some. I don't know what the right answer is anymore. Isabel would have known, but You're doing the best you can, Lila said quietly. That's all anyone can do. She descended the stairs before he could respond, returning to her kitchen where dough waited to be shaped and the storm pressed against the windows like the hand of fate itself. But something had shifted. Some line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. Lila shaped loaves by lamplight, her hands moving through the familiar patterns, and tried not to think about the way Maggie's fingers had felt wrapped around hers, the way Caleb had looked at his sleeping daughter with such naked helplessness, the way for just a moment this strange broken house had felt like it might someday be something more than a place to hide. Outside, the storm screamed its fury at the darkness. Inside, bread rose slow and patient, transforming itself in the warmth. And upstairs, a man who'd forgotten how to hope sat beside his daughter's bed, watching her sleep, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, the baker who'd appeared out of nowhere might be exactly what his shattered family needed, even if neither of them were ready to admit it yet. The storm lasted 3 days. During that time, the world shrank to the boundaries of the ranch house, kitchen, stairs, and the small room where a child slept fitfully through nights that seemed to have no end. The hands sheltered in the bunkhouse, emerging only to tend the animals and check fence lines before retreating back to warmth and cards, and the kind of restless energy that came from men forced into idleness. Lila baked. She baked until the kitchen filled with the yeasty warmth of rising dough, until loaves lined every available surface, until the scent of bread became so pervasive it seemed to seep into the walls themselves. She baked because it was the only thing she knew how to do when the world felt like it was coming apart. Because flour and water and salt couldn't hurt you if you handled them right. Because in the alchemy of fermentation and heat, there was a kind of magic that made sense when nothing else did. On the second night, Maggie's screams pulled her from sleep again. This time, Lila didn't hesitate. She took the stairs quickly, finding Caleb already in his daughter's room, trying to wake her from the nightmare's grip. But Maggie was thrashing, fighting against his hands like they were the source of her terror, rather than its remedy. Let me, Lila said from the doorway. Caleb looked up, his face haggard in the lamplight. For a moment she thought he might refuse, pride or stubbornness, or the simple fact that admitting he needed help went against everything a man like him had been taught. But then he stepped back, surrendering the field. Lila knelt beside the bed and took Maggie's hands in hers, same as before. You're safe, she murmured. Feel my hands? You're here. You're home. Breathe with me now. In and out. The child's eyes found hers, recognition flickering through the terror. Her breathing gradually slowed, her small body going limp as the nightmare released its hold. There you go, Lila whispered. That's my brave girl. Behind her, she heard Caleb make a sound, something caught between relief and grief. But she didn't turn around, just kept her focus on Maggie, on bringing her back to the present moment, until those dark eyes cleared completely and the child reached up to touch Lila's face with wondering fingers. "Sleep now," Lila said gently. "I'll stay right here." She settled into the chair beside the bed, and Maggie's hand found hers beneath the quilts and held on like an anchor. Across the room, Caleb sank into the other chair, elbows on his knees, face in his hands. They sat in silence while the storm battered the house, and Maggie drifted back to sleep. The lamp burned low, casting shadows that made the room feel smaller, more intimate than it should. "Her mother died in this room," Caleb said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Fever took her in 3 days. Maggie was right there, holding her hand, when Isabel took her last breath." Lila's chest constricted. She looked down at the child sleeping peacefully now and tried to imagine witnessing such a thing at 4 years old. Tried to imagine how the world must have fractured in that moment. "She hasn't spoken since," Caleb continued. "Not a single word in 2 years. Doctors said it was trauma. Said maybe time would heal it, or maybe it wouldn't. They couldn't say for certain." He lifted his head, meeting Lila's eyes across the dimness. "I don't even know if she remembers how to talk anymore, or if she's just chosen not to." "She remembers," Lila said quietly. "She's just waiting. For what? To feel safe enough to use her voice again." Caleb absorbed this, turning it over in his mind. "And you think you can do that? Make her feel safe?" "I think bread helps. Routine helps. Knowing someone will show up when you scream, that helps too." Something shifted in his expression. "You know this from experience." It wasn't a question, so Lila didn't answer it directly. "Everyone's got their scars. Some just show more than others." He studied her face for a long moment, and Lila fought the urge to look away. To hide the truth written in the set of her jaw, the wariness in her eyes, the way she held herself like someone expecting a blow. "The man you're running from," Caleb said slowly. "He hurt you." "Yes." "Badly?" "Badly enough that I'll never go back." Caleb nodded, accepting this. "Does he know where you are?" "No, and I intend to keep it that way." "Good." He stood, moving to the window where snow pressed against the glass like a living thing. "I won't ask you to tell me the details, but I need to know. Are you in danger? Is he the kind of man who'd come looking?" Lila considered lying, considered telling him that Evan Rourke was a gentleman who'd simply fallen out of love, that she'd left of her own accord with his blessing and best wishes. But something about the way Caleb had admitted his own helplessness, his own failure to protect his daughter from nightmares, made her want to offer truth in return. "He's the kind of man who doesn't let go of things he considers his," she said carefully. "But he thinks I'm dead. As long as he keeps thinking that, I'm safe." Caleb's shoulders tensed. "You faked your death?" "I ran when he was drunk enough not to follow immediately. Made it look like I drowned in the Chicago River. Left my coat on the bridge, my shoes on the bank. By the time he sobered up enough to look for me, the newspapers were already reporting the tragedy." She paused. "I didn't have much choice. He'd made it very clear what would happen if I tried to leave." "Jesus." Caleb turned from the window, his face hard with something that might have been anger, but not at her. "How long were you with him?" 3 years, felt like 30. And before that, I worked in a bakery, had my own life. Then I made the mistake of thinking a man's attention meant he loved me rather than wanted to own me." The words came out sharper than she intended. "I won't make that mistake again." Caleb held her gaze, and something like understanding passed between them. Two people who'd learned the same lesson from different teachers. Love could destroy you if you let it. Better to build walls. Better to stay alone than risk that kind of devastation again. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "for what you went through, and for being so cold when you arrived. I thought—" He rubbed a hand over his face. "I don't know what I thought. That keeping Maggie isolated would protect her somehow. That if I didn't let anyone close, we couldn't lose anyone else. Did it work?" "No, just made everything harder." He looked down at his sleeping daughter, and the grief in his expression was so raw, Lila had to look away. "I'm failing her. Every day, I wake up and try to be what she needs, and every day I fall short. And I don't know how to fix it." Lila thought about the flowers Maggie left in the kitchen, the careful way she ate the bread Lila made, the trust in her eyes when Lila's hands pulled her from nightmares. "You're not failing her," she said quietly. "You're keeping her alive, keeping the ranch running. That's not nothing. It's not enough either. Maybe not, but maybe you don't have to do it alone anymore." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to examine too closely. Caleb looked at her, and Lila looked back, and for a moment the world narrowed to just this. Two broken people in a dark room, holding vigil over a sleeping child while a storm tried to tear the house apart. "The bread on the porch," Caleb said. "You'll keep leaving it?" "If you want me to." "I do." He moved toward the door, then paused. "And the nightmares. If you hear them, and I'm not already here, I'll come." "Thank you." After he left, Lila sat in the chair listening to Maggie breathe and thought about the strange shape her life was taking. She'd come here to disappear, to exchange herself for a paycheck and a place to hide. But somehow, in the space between bread and nightmares, she was becoming visible again, becoming necessary. And that terrified her almost as much as the thought of Evan finding her. Because necessary meant mattering, and mattering meant having something to lose. By the third morning, the storm had blown itself out, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow lay in drifts higher than a man's head, sculpted by wind into shapes that looked almost deliberate. The sun came out hard and bright, turning everything to diamond brilliance that hurt to look at. The hands emerged from the bunkhouse like animals from hibernation, blinking against the light. They dug paths between buildings, checked the livestock, and began the slow process of assessing damage. 2 calves lost to cold, part of the barn roof torn loose, fence lines down in 3 sections. "Could have been worse," Hewitt said, accepting coffee from Lila's hands with a grateful nod. "Could have been a hell of a lot worse." Caleb said nothing, just stared out at the whitened landscape with the expression of a man calculating costs he couldn't afford. That afternoon, a rider appeared on the southern ridge. Lila was kneading dough when Hewitt came through the kitchen door, his face set in grim lines. "We got company. Pritchard's foreman, looks like." Caleb's jaw tightened. "What's he want?" "Nothing good, I'd wager." They went out to meet the rider, a lean man in expensive clothes that looked out of place against the rough landscape. Lila watched through the window as they talked, noting the way Caleb's shoulders went rigid, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. When the rider left, Caleb stood in the yard for a long time, staring at nothing. Then he turned and walked toward the barn without a word to anyone. "What was that about?" Lila asked when Hewitt came back inside. The old cowboy poured himself more coffee, his movements heavy with fatigue and worry. "Marcus Pritchard owns the land north of here. Been trying to buy Caleb out for 2 years now, wants to run a big cattle operation, and Heartland sits right in the middle of his plans. And Caleb won't sell? This ranch has been in his family 3 generations. His grandfather broke this land, built the house with his own hands. Caleb would sooner die than sell it to a man like Pritchard." Hewitt's expression darkened. "But Pritchard's not the kind to take no for an answer. He's got resources Caleb doesn't. Money, connections, men who aren't too particular about how they get things done." A cold weight settled in Lila's stomach. What did the foreman want? "Made another offer, higher than the last one, but still an insult for what this place is worth. Gave Caleb until spring to decide." He met her eyes, and she saw real fear there. "But the thing is, Caleb's already in debt up to his eyeballs. Lost too much stock last winter, and then Isabel's medical bills before she died. They nearly bankrupted him. Another bad season, and the bank will foreclose whether he wants to sell or not. Does Pritchard know this? I'd bet my last dollar on it." Hewitt set down his cup with more force than necessary. "That son of a bitch is waiting for Caleb to fail. Soon as the bank takes the land, Pritchard will be right there to buy it for half what it's worth." Lila turned back to her dough, working it with renewed intensity as her mind raced. She'd fled one kind of trap only to land in another. If the ranch failed, she'd be out of work again, out of hiding. And the thought of going back out into the world where Evan might be waiting made her hands shake. But more than that, and this was the part that scared her most, she'd started to care about this place, about the child who left flowers in exchange for bread, about the man who sat vigil beside his daughter's bed with the helpless devotion of someone who'd already lost too much. She couldn't let them lose this too. That evening, after supper had been served and the hands had dispersed to various corners of the ranch, Lila found Caleb in the barn checking on a mare who'd been favoring her left front leg. "Hewitt told me about Pritchard," she said without preamble. Caleb didn't look up from examining the horse's hoof. "Not your concern." "Maybe not, but I'm here anyway." He set the hoof down carefully and straightened, meeting her eyes across the mare's back. "Why? You planning to solve my financial problems with bread?" The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut, but Lila didn't flinch. "No, I'm planning to help if I can, and stay out of the way if I can't, but I deserve to know if I'm about to be out of work come spring." Caleb's expression softened slightly. "Fair enough." He moved around the horse, running a hand along her neck in the absent way of someone who'd spent a lifetime with animals. "Truth is, I don't know. I owe the bank more than I can pay without selling stock. But if I sell stock, I won't have enough breeding pairs to rebuild the herd. And if I don't rebuild the herd, you can't make enough to pay the bank." "Exactly." He leaned against the stall door, exhaustion written in every line of his body. "I keep running the numbers trying to find a way out. But every path leads to the same place, losing this ranch." Lila thought about the hands she'd fed every day for 3 weeks. Good men, hard workers, the kind who gave their loyalty to a place rather than a paycheck. "What about the men? Do they know?" "Some suspect, but I haven't told them outright. Seems cruel to ruin their winter with problems they can't fix." "They deserve to know. This is their home too." Caleb looked at her sharply. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't lie awake every night thinking about the dozen families who'll be out of work when this place goes under?" His voice cracked. "I'm doing the best I can, Lila. But my best isn't good enough. It hasn't been good enough since Isabel died, and I don't know how to make it better." The rawness in his admission hit her like a physical blow. She'd seen him hard and cold and closed off, but this vulnerable honesty was something else entirely. Something that made her want to reach across the space between them and offer comfort she had no right to give. Instead, she said, "Tell me the numbers." "What?" "The debt. What you owe, what you make, what you need. Tell me all of it." Caleb stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Why?" "Because sometimes a fresh set of eyes sees solutions you can't. Because I'm good with numbers. And because if this ranch goes under, I lose my hiding place, so I have a vested interest in keeping it afloat." She crossed her arms, meeting his skepticism with steady determination. "Now, are you going to waste time arguing, or are you going to show me the books?" For a long moment, he didn't move. Then slowly, something that might have been respect flickered across his face. "The books are in the house. Office off the main room. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes, after I clean up the kitchen." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Lila? Why are you doing this?" She looked back at him, silhouetted against the lamplight, and thought about all the reasons she could give. About self-preservation and gratitude and the simple human need to be useful. But what came out was the truth. Because Maggie deserves to grow up in the house where her mother lived, and because you deserve not to fail at the one thing you're fighting to protect. She paused. And because for the first time in 3 years, I'm starting to remember what it feels like to have something worth protecting too. The office was exactly what she expected. Masculine, sparse, and organized with military precision. Ledgers lined one shelf, each spine labeled with a year. A desk dominated the space, its surface clear except for a lamp, an inkwell, and a single photograph in a simple frame. Lila picked up the photograph while Caleb pulled down the current ledger. It showed a woman, dark-haired, beautiful in the way of people who laughed easily, holding a baby girl against a backdrop of prairie grass and summer sky. Isabel Hart had been lovely. More than that, she'd been vibrant. You could see it in the way she held her child, in the joy radiating from her expression. "She was beautiful," Lila said quietly. "Yes." Caleb set the ledger on the desk with a heavy thud. She was everything good about this place. When she died, it was like the light went out. Lila set the photograph down carefully and turned her attention to the numbers. For the next 2 hours, she and Caleb went through every entry, every debt, every source of income. The picture that emerged was grim but not hopeless. Caleb owed the bank $12,000. A staggering sum, but not impossible if they could increase revenue while cutting costs. The hands, Lila said, running her finger down a column of wages. You're paying them top dollar. They're worth it. I'm not arguing. But what if you offered them a choice? Reduced wages now in exchange for shares in the ranch later? If we turn this around, they'd own a piece of what they helped save. Caleb frowned. That's assuming we turn it around. We will, but we need capital first. What about selling the yearling steers early, before spring market? We'd take a loss on the price. A small loss now versus a total loss later. Use that money to pay down enough debt that the bank stops circling. Then we focus on the breeding program, quality over quantity. Sell fewer head but at premium prices. That's a 3-year plan at minimum. Good. You've got 3 years before Maggie's old enough to care that the ranch is mortgaged. Make them count. Lila tapped the ledger. What about the hand's food budget? I've been using premium ingredients because you told me to spare no expense. But I could cut costs by 20% easy and still feed them well. No. Caleb's voice was firm. The men work hard. They deserve good food. They deserve to keep their jobs more. They'll understand. He studied her across the desk, and Lila felt the weight of his assessment. You're serious about this? About helping save the ranch? I don't say things I don't mean. Why, though? You could just find another position, easier than fighting a losing battle. Lila thought about Maggie's hand in hers during nightmares, about the way the kitchen felt like hers now, about how bread rising in the pre-dawn darkness had become the rhythm she'd needed to feel human again. Maybe I'm tired of running, she said quietly. Maybe I want to see if staying and fighting is possible after all. Caleb's expression softened. I can't promise you'll still have a job come summer. I know. Or that we'll succeed. I know that too. But you're willing to try anyway? Yes. She met his eyes steadily. Are you? For the first time since she'd arrived, Caleb Hart smiled. It was a small thing, barely a curve at the corner of his mouth, but it transformed his face, made him look younger, less like a man carrying the weight of the world, and more like someone who'd just remembered hope was possible. Yeah, he said, I'm willing to try. They worked late into the night, building a plan that felt fragile as spun sugar, but stronger than despair. Sell the yearlings, renegotiate with the bank, offer the hands partnership instead of wages, cut costs where possible, bet everything on the breeding program and pray the market held. It wasn't perfect. It probably wasn't even enough. But it was something. And something was infinitely better than the nothing Caleb had been working with before. When Lila finally returned to her room, the house was quiet except for the settling sounds of old wood in winter cold. She lay in her narrow bed, too tired to sleep, and thought about the strange turns life took when you stopped trying to control it. She'd come here expecting to disappear. Instead, she was becoming more visible, more necessary than she'd been in years. And the terrifying thing was that she didn't want to disappear anymore. She wanted to stay. Wanted to see Maggie grow brave enough to speak. Wanted to help Caleb save the ranch his grandfather had built. Wanted to wake up every morning and bake bread that mattered to people who mattered to her. The wanting was dangerous. Wanting meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant Evan could hurt her all over again if he ever found her. But maybe, just maybe, some things were worth the risk. Outside her window, the winter moon turned snow to silver. Somewhere in the house, Maggie slept peacefully through the night for the first time in weeks. And in the office, Caleb sat staring at ledgers with something that looked almost like hope beginning to take root. The storm had passed, but the real test was just beginning. And Lila Mercer, who'd spent 3 years learning to be invisible, was about to discover that being seen, truly seen, by people who needed you might be the most terrifying and wonderful thing in the world. The plan went into motion on a Tuesday morning sharp with cold and possibility. Caleb gathered the hands in the barn after breakfast, 12 men who'd worked this land through seasons good and bad, who knew every fence line and water source like they knew their own names. Lila stood in the kitchen doorway watching through the gap, close enough to hear, but not so close as to intrude on what was clearly a private matter between a man and his crew. I'm going to be straight with you, Caleb said, his voice carrying across the frozen yard. This ranch is in trouble. Bad trouble. I owe the bank more than I can pay, and if we don't turn things around by spring, we'll lose everything." The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Chen shifted his weight, jaw tight. Tommy looked at his boots. Hewitt spat tobacco juice into the snow and waited. "I can't pay full wages anymore," Caleb continued, "but I'm not asking you to work for nothing either. I'm offering partnership, reduced pay now, but shares in the ranch later. If we save this place, you'll own part of what you helped build. If we fail—" He paused, the words clearly costing him. "If we fail, at least we'll have tried together." "What percentage?" Hewitt asked, ever practical. 5% split between all of you who stay. More if we bring in profit above projections. And if we say no, then you leave with my blessing and a month's wages to see you through to the next job. No hard feelings. This isn't your fight unless you choose to make it yours." The men looked at each other, some silent conversation passing between them that needed no words. Finally, Chen stepped forward. "My father came to this country with nothing," he said quietly. "Worked railroad gangs, took jobs no one else would touch, saved for 20 years to buy land of his own, but he died before he could. This is the closest I'll ever get to owning something that matters." He met Caleb's eyes steadily. "I'm in." "Me too," Tommy said immediately. "My pa lost his ranch to a bank in Texas. I won't watch it happen here without fighting." One by one, the others nodded their agreement. Not all of them. 2 hands took their wages and left that afternoon, heading south for California and easier prospects. But 10 stayed. 10 men who looked at Caleb Hart and saw something worth preserving, who looked at the land and saw home. Lila watched Caleb's shoulders unbend slightly under the weight of their loyalty and felt something shift in her own chest. These men had chosen to stay, had chosen to fight, and she'd already made the same choice without fully realizing it. That evening, Caleb sold the yearling steers to a buyer from Billings at a loss that made Lila's stomach turn. But the money went straight to the bank, buying them breathing room and time. Not much, but enough. The real work began the next day. Lila cut the food budget with surgical precision, stretching every dollar until it screamed. She bought cheaper cuts of meat and made them tender through long braising. She used every scrap, bones for stock, vegetable trimmings for soup, stale bread for pudding. The meals were still good, still nourishing, but they cost half what they had before. "Tastes different," Hewitt said one night, poking at his stew with mild suspicion. "Tastes like survival," Lila replied. "Eat it or go hungry." He ate it. They all did. And if anyone noticed that Lila herself ate less than she served, that her dresses hung looser as winter deepened, no one said anything. Resources were scarce, and she'd learned long ago how to make herself smaller to accommodate scarcity. But Maggie noticed. The child appeared in the kitchen one morning to find her usual generous breakfast replaced with a single biscuit and a scraping of jam. She looked at the meager portion, then up at Lila, and her dark eyes filled with something that looked like betrayal. "I'm sorry," Lila said quietly, crouching down to Maggie's level. "We have to be careful with food right now, just for a little while." Maggie's lower lip trembled. Then, with careful deliberation, she broke the biscuit in half and held one piece out to Lila. The gesture was so unexpected, so purely generous, that Lila felt tears prick her eyes. "No, sweetness. That's yours. You're growing. You need it more than I do." But Maggie was insistent, pressing the biscuit half into Lila's hand with the kind of determination that would have been imperious if it weren't so heartbreaking. "Share," her expression said. "Expression. We share." So Lila took the offered half and ate it slowly while Maggie watched with satisfaction. And something in the silent exchange felt more like communion than any prayer Lila had ever spoken. After that, Maggie began spending more time in the kitchen. She didn't speak, still hadn't uttered a single word, but she communicated through action and presence. She'd appear at Lila's elbow while bread was being kneaded, small hands reaching up to touch the dough. Lila would tear off a piece and let her work it, showing her how to fold and press, how to feel when the texture was right. They developed a rhythm together. Lila would shape loaves while Maggie arranged the smaller pieces into primitive forms, animals mostly, though some were abstract enough to defy identification. When the bread came out of the oven, golden and perfect, Maggie would clap her hands in silent delight. Caleb would find them like that sometimes, flour-dusted and focused, working side by side in the warm kitchen while Winter pressed against the windows. He never interrupted, just stood in the doorway watching his daughter do something that looked almost like healing, and the expression on his face was complex enough that Lila had to look away. January arrived with brutal cold that turned breath to ice and made the morning walk to the barn an exercise in survival. The hands worked in shifts, checking cattle, breaking ice on water troughs, hauling feed through snow that came up to their knees. It was exhausting, relentless work, and by night they fell into their bunks too tired even for cards. Lila kept them fed, kept the kitchen warm, kept bread rising and coffee hot, and made sure no one went out into the cold without something solid in their belly. It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough. But it was what she had to give. And at night, when the house went quiet and Maggie slept peacefully in her room upstairs, Lila would sit with Caleb at the kitchen table going over numbers, calculating feed costs against projected calf crop, figuring how many breeding pairs they could sustain versus how many they needed to sell, planning for a future that felt perpetually just out of reach. "We're going to make it," Caleb said one night, more hope than certainty in his voice. "Yes," Lila agreed, though she wasn't sure she believed it any more than he did. But believing didn't matter as much as trying, and they were both very good at trying. The trouble came on a morning in late January, arriving in the form of 3 men on horseback. Lila saw them first from the kitchen window, rough-looking characters with the kind of deliberate menace that made her blood go cold. They weren't cowboys, weren't ranchers. They were hired muscle, the type who got paid to deliver messages that polite society wouldn't stomach. Pritchard's men. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to find Caleb. He was in the barn with Chen, checking on a cow who'd calved overnight. The look on Lila's face must have said enough because he handed the newborn calf to Chen and followed her outside without a word. The men had dismounted in the yard. The leader, a big man with a scar bisecting one eyebrow, smiled when he saw Caleb, and there was nothing friendly in the expression. "Hart, Mr. Pritchard asked me to deliver a message." "I'm listening." "He's heard you're having financial difficulties. Real shame, that. He wanted me to remind you his offer still stands. In fact, he's prepared to increase it, given the circumstances." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Tell Pritchard the answer is still no." "Now that's not very smart. See, Mr. Pritchard is a patient man, but his patience has limits, and he's starting to think maybe you need some help understanding the gravity of your situation." The scarred man gestured to the ranch buildings, the snow-covered land beyond. "Be a real shame if something happened to all this. Accidents happen all the time in winter. Barn fires, fence lines cut, stock going missing." "That sounds like a threat." "Just stating facts. Winter's dangerous. Man could lose everything if he's not careful." Caleb took a step forward, and Lila saw the fury coiling in him like a snake preparing to strike. But before he could do something stupid, Hewitt emerged from the bunkhouse with 6 hands at his back, all of them armed with rifles they carried with the casual competence of men who knew how to use them. The scarred man's smile faltered slightly. "That's a lot of firepower for a friendly conversation." "Conversation's over," Hewitt said flatly. "You've delivered your message. Time to leave." For a moment, the tension stretched tight enough to snap. Then the scarred man shrugged and remounted his horse. "We'll be seeing you, Hart, real soon." They rode off slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone understood they weren't leaving out of fear but choice. When they were finally out of sight, Caleb's shoulders sagged. "This is going to get worse," he said quietly. "I know," Hewitt spat into the snow, "but we've got numbers on our side, and we know this land better than any hired guns Pritchard can throw at us. They won't find it easy." "They don't need easy. They just need to hurt us enough that I can't keep fighting." Lila listened to this exchange with growing dread. She'd run from one kind of violence only to land in the path of another. The pattern felt sickeningly familiar, powerful men using threats and force to take what they wanted, while people like her and Caleb and these loyal hands scrambled to protect the little they had. But there was one crucial difference. This time, she wasn't alone. And this time, she wasn't willing to run. "We need to be smart about this," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "Pritchard wants you to fail. Every threat, every act of sabotage. He's counting on it breaking your spirit or your finances, so we don't give him the satisfaction. Easy to say, Caleb muttered. Not easy at all, but necessary. Lila's mind was already working through possibilities, strategies, ways to turn weakness into strength. What if we use what he thinks is our vulnerability against him? How? We're struggling financially. Everyone knows it. So why not lean into that? Make it public. Let the whole territory know Hart Ranch is fighting for survival. She looked at Caleb intently. People like an underdog. They especially like an underdog fighting against a bully with too much power. Hewitt frowned. You want us to advertise our weakness? I want you to build sympathy. Make it harder for Pritchard to move against you without looking like exactly what he is. A rich man crushing a family ranch for his own greed. Caleb considered this, and Lila could see the wheels turning. The town. If we get Silver Ridge on our side, then Pritchard can't operate in the shadows anymore. Every move he makes will be watched, judged. Lila felt the plan crystallizing, gaining weight and substance. And if we're smart about it, we can turn this into something that brings revenue too. How? Bread. Caleb blinked. You've lost me. I make the best bread in Montana, probably in the whole territory. What if we start selling it? Not just feeding the hands, but selling to the town, to travelers, to anyone who'll buy. We package it as something special, frontier bread, made on a ranch fighting to survive. People love a story, Caleb. Give them one worth buying into. The hands were listening now, interested despite their skepticism. Chen spoke up first. The town's 2 hours away. Bread wouldn't stay fresh for the trip. So we make it worth the trip. I'll bake fresh every morning, multiple varieties, all premium quality. We deliver while it's still warm. Price it right and people will pay. You think folks will pay premium prices for bread in the middle of winter? Hewitt didn't sound convinced. I think they'll pay for quality. For something that makes a hard life feel a little more bearable. And I think they'll pay even more if they know they're helping keep a family ranch alive. Lila turned to Caleb. Let me try. Worst case, we lose a little flour. Best case, we build something that sustains us and makes Pritchard think twice about coming after us publicly. Caleb studied her face for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, we try it your way. I'll need help, someone to make deliveries, handle sales. I'll do it, Tommy volunteered immediately. I'm good with people, and I've got family in town who can spread word. Then we start tomorrow. Lila felt something fierce and determined settling into her bones. Pritchard wants to destroy this ranch? Let's show him what we're made of first. That night, Lila baked like her life depended on it. Because in a way it did. She mixed dough for wheat bread, rye bread, sourdough rounds that would stay fresh for days. She braided challah that gleamed like honey. She shaped rolls and buns and small loaves, perfect for individual sale. The kitchen filled with yeasty warmth and the kind of focused energy that came from purpose. Maggie appeared around midnight, patting down the stairs in her nightgown. She climbed onto the stool beside the work table and watched Lila shape dough with hypnotic precision, small hands eventually reaching out to help. Together, they worked in comfortable silence, woman and child, creating something beautiful from simple ingredients. When the first loaves came out of the oven, Maggie's eyes went wide. Lila tore off a piece of the heel, still steaming, and offered it to her. What do you think? Maggie ate slowly, seriously, like a judge rendering verdict. Then she smiled, an actual genuine smile that transformed her solemn little face into something radiant, and held out her hand for more. Good? Lila asked. Maggie nodded emphatically. Good enough to save the ranch? Another nod, this one accompanied by a look of such fierce certainty that Lila almost believed it. They baked until dawn, until the kitchen was lined with cooling loaves and the air was thick with the scent of achievement. Tommy arrived as the sun broke over the mountains, his wagon loaded with crates and blankets to keep the bread warm. We're really doing this, he said, looking at the array of baked goods with something like awe. We're really doing this. Lila handed him a price list she'd written out in careful script. Start with the general store, then the hotel. Anyone who'll buy, sell to. And Tommy? Yeah? Tell them the truth. About the ranch, about fighting to survive. People need to know what they're buying into. Will do. He loaded the wagon with reverent care, treating each loaf like the precious commodity it was. "I'll be back by afternoon with either money or excuses." He returned with money. Not a fortune, but enough to matter, enough to prove the concept worked. The general store had taken 24 loaves and promised to order more. The hotel wanted standing deliveries for their dining room, and 3 families had bought directly, paying premium prices for bread that tasted like home. "They asked questions," Tommy reported, counting coins onto the kitchen table. "About you, about the ranch. I told them what you said, that we're fighting to keep this place alive, and every loaf they buy helps. Mrs. Chen at the store, she cried. Said her own family lost their land back in '79, and she'd be damned if she'd watch it happen to someone else without doing her part." Lila felt emotion clog her throat. "People are good." "Some people," Tommy agreed. "The ones that matter." Word spread faster than Lila expected. By the end of the week, orders were coming in from ranches she'd never heard of, from the railroad camp 20 miles east, from travelers passing through who'd heard about the baker at Hart Ranch, who made bread worth the detour. Tommy made daily runs, and still they couldn't keep up with demand. "I need help," Lila told Caleb after a particularly exhausting day. "I can't bake enough by myself." "What do you need?" "Another set of hands, someone I can train." Caleb looked at his daughter, who was currently covered in flour up to her elbows, grinning while she pounded dough with the intensity of someone performing important work. "I think I know someone." So Maggie became Lila's official assistant. She couldn't knead bread properly yet. Her arms weren't strong enough, but she could measure ingredients, grease pans, watch the oven, and perform a dozen small tasks that freed Lila to focus on the skilled work. More than that, she brought joy to the process. Her silent presence was somehow louder than words, filling the kitchen with the kind of contentment that came from purposeful work. And slowly, imperceptibly, she began to heal. She stopped flinching when Lila touched her, started sleeping through the night without nightmares, would reach for Lila's hand unprompted, holding on while they walked to the barn or stood watching the sunset paint the snow in shades of rose and gold. She still didn't speak. That silence remained unbroken, but her eyes had lost their haunted quality. She laughed now, soundless but real, when something delighted her. Caleb watched this transformation with an expression that made Lila's chest ache. Gratitude mixed with grief, hope mixed with fear. He'd spent 2 years trying to reach his daughter, and in 2 months a stranger with scarred hands and her own broken history had accomplished what he couldn't. "I'm not trying to replace Isabel," Lila said one evening, catching him watching them through the kitchen window. "I know." He turned to face her fully. "But you're giving Maggie something I can't, and I'm grateful for it, even if it hurts to admit I need the help. We all need help sometimes. That's not weakness, it's just truth." "When did you get so wise?" "When I survived something that should have killed me and decided wisdom was cheaper than therapy." The joke came out darker than she intended, but Caleb didn't flinch from it. "The man you ran from, does he know about Maggie, about any of this?" "No, and he never will if I can help it." "But you're afraid he'll find you anyway." "Every day." The admission cost her, but she owed him honesty. Every time someone new comes to the door, every stranger in the yard, I wonder if it's him, if this is the day my past catches up. Caleb's expression hardened. "If he shows up here, he'll regret it." "He's dangerous, Caleb, really dangerous. You don't understand what he's capable of." "Then help me understand." So she told him. Not everything. Some scars were too deep to expose even to someone she was starting to trust. But enough. About Evan Rourke's charm that had hooked her like a fish. About how the charm had curdled into possession, then control, then violence. About the night he'd held her down and burned her arms with a fireplace poker because she'd talked to another man at a party. About how she'd planned her escape for months, stealing money penny by penny, and finally running when he was too drunk to follow immediately. "He told me he'd kill me if I left," she said quietly. "And I believed him, still believe him. That's why I had to make him think I was already dead." Caleb listened without interruption, his face growing stonier with each revelation. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "If he comes here, he dies. Simple as that." "It's not simple. He has money, connections. He could destroy you." "Let him try." The certainty in Caleb's voice was absolute. "You're under my protection now. You and Maggie both. And I don't fail twice. The words settled over Lila like a blanket, warm and heavy and almost too much to bear. Protection. When was the last time anyone had offered her that? When was the last time she'd believed it was possible? Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me. Just keep being what Maggie needs. What this ranch needs. He paused. What I need. Their eyes met across the dimming light, and Lila felt something shift between them. Something that had been building since that first night when she'd pulled Maggie from nightmares, since the hours spent planning in his office, since every small moment of trust exchanged and honored. Danger, her mind warned. This is how it starts. This is how you get hurt again. But her heart, her foolish, hopeful heart, whispered something different. Maybe not all men are Evan. Maybe this one is different. Maybe you're allowed to want something good after surviving something terrible. The moment stretched, fragile and full of possibility. Then Maggie appeared in the doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit, and the spell broke. Bedtime, Caleb said, his voice rougher than usual. Come on, little one. He scooped his daughter into his arms, and she went willingly, resting her head on his shoulder with the trust of someone who knew she was safe. As they climbed the stairs together, Maggie looked back at Lila and waved, a small gesture but deliberate, inclusive. Good night, it said. See you tomorrow. Lila waved back, throat tight with emotions she didn't have names for. That night, she dreamed of bread rising in the darkness, of a child's laughter filling a kitchen, of a man with storm cloud eyes looking at her like she was something precious rather than something to be used. And for the first time in 3 years, her dreams didn't turn into nightmares. But 200 miles south, in a Chicago office that reeked of cigar smoke and expensive whiskey, Evan Rourke sat reading a newspaper report about a baker on a Montana ranch making bread worth the journey. The article mentioned no names, but it described a woman with scarred hands and a gift for creating something beautiful from simple ingredients, and Evan Rourke's eyes narrowed with terrible recognition. He'd always said Lila couldn't hide forever, and he'd been right. The hunt was on. February brought a thaw that turned the world to mud and made the roads nearly impassable, but it didn't slow the bread orders. If anything, they increased. Tommy made his deliveries on horseback now, the bread wrapped in oilcloth and packed in saddlebags, and he came back each evening with his pockets heavy with coins and stories about how people talked about Hart Ranch like it was something worth saving. Mrs. Patterson at the hotel said she's never seen guests so happy about breakfast, he reported one evening, grinning. And the railroad foreman wants to set up a contract, 3 dozen loaves twice a week for his crew, says it's cheaper than listening to them complain about the camp cook. Lila tallied the numbers with hands that had finally stopped shaking every time she counted money. They were making enough to cover costs and then some. Not enough to save the ranch outright, but enough to prove they were fighting smart instead of just fighting hard. We need to expand, she told Caleb that night. The demand is there, but I can't bake more without help. What are you thinking? Hire someone from town. A woman who needs work and knows her way around a kitchen. Pay her fair wages, train her properly. Lila paused, considering. And maybe we don't just sell bread. Maybe we sell the story too. Caleb raised an eyebrow. How? Tours. Let people come see where the bread is made. Show them the ranch. Tell them about the fight to save it. People are buying into something bigger than bread. They're buying into the idea that hard work and community matter. So we give them the full experience. You want strangers tramping through my kitchen? Our kitchen. And yes, I do. Because every person who comes here and sees what we're building is someone who'll go back and tell others. Free advertising, Caleb, and goodwill we can't buy. He looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon, but there was respect in his skepticism. You've got this all figured out, don't you? I've got survival figured out. The rest is just improvisation. She met his eyes steadily. But we're running out of time. Spring is coming, and with it Pritchard's deadline. We need every advantage we can get. Then we do it your way. He smiled, and the expression still caught her off guard every time, the way it softened his harsh features, made him look younger and less burdened. I'm starting to think hiring you was the smartest thing I've done in years. Just starting to think it? I'm a slow learner. The moment hung between them, warm and comfortable, until Maggie appeared with flour on her nose and a wooden spoon clutched like a scepter. She climbed into Caleb's lap without hesitation, and he wrapped his arms around her with the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd learned exactly how fragile happiness could be. Lila watched them together and felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Want. The specific kind that came from imagining herself as part of this picture permanently, as someone who belonged in this kitchen with this man and this child. The kind of want that Evan had beaten out of her, that she'd thought was dead and buried. But it wasn't dead. It was just dormant. And now it was waking up, stretching toward light like something growing despite the frost. She turned away before Caleb could see her expression, busying herself with cleaning up the day's baking mess. But she felt his eyes on her back, felt the weight of his attention like a physical touch, and wondered if he was feeling the same dangerous hope that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The woman from town arrived on a Monday morning, brought by Tommy in the wagon. Her name was Sarah Chen, Tommy's aunt by marriage, and she had the kind of quiet competence that came from raising 5 children on a laundress's wages. She was small, efficient, and utterly unflappable in the face of Lila's exacting standards. "My niece says you make bread like poetry," Sarah said, tying on an apron with practiced efficiency. "I make bread like arithmetic, but I'm willing to learn if you're willing to teach." "Can you follow instructions exactly?" "To the letter." "Can you work 12-hour days without complaining?" "I've been doing that for 20 years. At least here I'll get paid for it." Lila smiled despite herself. "Then let's see what you can do." Sarah proved to be everything Lila needed, fast, precise, and completely unbothered by the chaos of a kitchen producing bread at scale. Within a week, she'd learned Lila's methods and rhythms. Within 2, she was handling half the production herself, freeing Lila to experiment with new recipes and manage the growing business side of their operation. The tours started small. A family from Silver Ridge who'd heard about the ranch and wanted to see where the famous bread came from. Lila showed them the kitchen, explained the process, let them taste samples warm from the oven. They left with arms full of bread and eyes full of something that looked like inspiration. "My husband lost his job at the mill," the wife said as they were leaving. "Seeing what you've built here, it makes me think maybe we can build something too, something that's ours." Word spread. More families came. A reporter from the territorial newspaper arrived and wrote a story that painted Hart Ranch as a beacon of frontier resilience. Orders doubled, then tripled. Lila hired 2 more women from town, both widows who needed work and brought their own expertise to the kitchen. The ranch began to feel alive again, in a way Caleb said it hadn't since before Isabel died. There was purpose in the air, energy that went beyond mere survival. The hands walked taller. Maggie laughed more. And Caleb looked at Lila sometimes like she'd performed a miracle instead of just doing what needed to be done. "We're going to make it," he said one evening in early March, reviewing the books with an expression that mixed disbelief and hope. "The bank payment is due in 2 weeks, and we have enough. Actually, have enough." "Don't spend it yet," Lila cautioned, though she felt the same giddy relief. "We need reserves for spring planting, for, I know, but let me enjoy this for 5 minutes before I start worrying about the next crisis." So they sat in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed, drinking coffee and letting themselves feel the weight of what they'd accomplished together. Outside, the March wind howled, but inside it was warm and safe and filled with the yeasty scent of tomorrow's bread already rising. "I couldn't have done this without you," Caleb said quietly. "You know that, right?" "You could have. Would have found another way." "No. I was drowning before you got here, going through motions, waiting for the inevitable. You gave me something to fight for beyond just stubborn pride. I gave you bread recipes and budget cuts. That's hardly... You gave me hope." He reached across the table and took her hand, and the touch sent electricity up her arm. "You gave Maggie a reason to smile again. You gave this whole ranch a second chance. That's not nothing, Lila." She looked down at their joined hands, his scarred from work and weather, hers from burns and hard use, and thought about how strange it was that broken things could fit together so perfectly. "You gave me a place to be safe," she said quietly. "A place where I could be useful instead of just scared. That's not nothing either." "Is that all this is to you? Safety and usefulness?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with all the things neither of them had said out loud. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs, warning and want warring in her chest. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know how to want things anymore without being terrified of losing them. Me neither. Caleb's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, the touch so gentle it made her want to cry. But I'm starting to think maybe being terrified is better than being numb. Before Lila could respond, before she could examine too closely what he meant and what she wanted it to mean, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the moment. They both stood quickly, moving to the window. In the moonlight, a single rider was approaching fast, pushing his horse harder than was wise on muddy roads. As he got closer, Lila recognized him, one of Tommy's cousins who worked at the telegraph office in town. Caleb was out the door before the rider had fully stopped, Lila close behind. The young man was breathing hard, his face pale in the lamplight. Mr. Hart, got a telegram for Miss Mercer, marked urgent. He handed over a folded paper with trembling hands. Came in from Chicago just after sunset. Figured it couldn't wait till morning. Lila's blood turned to ice. Chicago. The only person in Chicago who knew her name was Evan. She took the telegram with numb fingers, and Caleb dismissed the rider with a coin and quiet thanks. Then they stood in the yard, the wind whipping around them, while Lila stared at the paper like it was a snake. Want me to read it? Caleb asked gently. She shook her head and unfolded it with hands that had started shaking again. Lila. Stop found you. Stop coming for what's mine. Stop nowhere to run this time. Stop Evan. The words blurred as Lila's vision tunneled. This was it. The nightmare she'd been running from, catching up at last. Evan knew where she was, knew she was alive, and he was coming. Lila. Caleb's voice seemed to come from very far away. Lila, what does it say? She handed him the telegram mutely and watched his face harden as he read. When he looked up, his eyes were storm-dark and furious. When? I don't know. Soon, probably. He's not patient when he's angry. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, flat and distant. I have to leave, tonight, before he gets here and ruins everything you've built. The hell you do. Caleb, you don't understand. He'll destroy this place just to punish me. He'll hurt anyone I care about. He'll do nothing because he's going to have to go through me first. Caleb gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. You're not running, not this time. You hear me? You can't protect me from him. Watch me. The absolute certainty in his voice should have been reassuring, but Lila had learned the hard way that certainty meant nothing against Evan's particular brand of cruelty. You don't know what he's like, what he'll do. Then tell me. All of it. Every detail you've been holding back. Because I can't fight an enemy I don't understand. So there, in the cold March night, with mud sucking at their boots and fear crawling up her spine, Lila told him everything. About Evan's wealth and connections, about the judges and police who owed him favors, about his absolute conviction that she was property he'd paid for with 3 years of room and board, about the systematic way he'd isolated her from friends and family, the calculated escalation of violence, the night he'd held her face over a candle flame and asked if she thought anyone else would want damaged goods. She showed him the scars on her arms, the ones she'd kept hidden beneath long sleeves even in summer. Showed him the burn on her shoulder that was shaped exactly like Evan's ring. Showed him the evidence of ownership she'd carried in her skin for 3 years. Caleb's face went white with rage. I'm going to kill him. He'll kill you first. Or have someone do it for him. He doesn't fight fair, Caleb. He fights to destroy. So do I when someone threatens what's mine. The possessive pronoun hit Lila like a physical blow. What's mine? She should hate those words, should flinch from the echo of Evan's ownership. But from Caleb's mouth, they meant something different, something about choice and protection instead of control. We need a plan, she said, forcing her mind to work through the panic. We need to be smart about this. We need the law. The law won't help. Evan has lawyers who can make anything disappear, and I'm legally... She swallowed hard. I was never legally married to him, so I have no rights, no claim to protection. I'm just a woman who ran away from a man's house. That's not a crime when he's the victim. Caleb's jaw worked with suppressed fury. Then we make our own law. This is my land. He has no authority here. He doesn't need authority. Just money and mean men willing to do whatever he pays them for. They stared at each other in the lamplight, the weight of their impossibility settling over them like fresh snow. Then Caleb said, "We tell the hands, all of them. Let them decide if they want to fight. They've already fought so much for this place. I can't ask them to fight for me too." "You're not asking. I am." He cupped her face in his scarred hands, and the gentleness of the touch nearly broke her. "You're part of this ranch now, part of this family, and we protect our own." Lila wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that found family was strong enough to stand against Evan's money and malice, but belief was a luxury she'd learned to live without. Still, she nodded. Because what else could she do? Running had bought her 6 months of peace, but it hadn't solved anything. And maybe, just maybe, standing and fighting with people who actually cared whether she lived or died was better than running alone again. They gathered the hands in the barn at dawn, all of them armed and wary after Caleb's urgent summons. Lila stood beside him, chin up, despite the fear making her hands shake, and watched as he explained the situation with brutal honesty. "A man is coming who means to hurt Lila. Maybe hurt all of us if we stand in his way. He's rich, he's connected, and he's the kind of evil that doesn't need a reason beyond wanting what he can't have." Caleb's voice rang clear in the cold barn. "I'm asking you to fight. Not ordering. Asking. Because this isn't your battle unless you choose to make it yours." The hands looked at each other, some silent conversation passing between them. Then Hewitt stepped forward. "She makes damn good bread," he said simply. "Be ashamed to let some Chicago bastard ruin that." Chen nodded. "My people know something about rich men who think they own other people. We're in." One by one, the others agreed. Even Sarah and the kitchen women, who'd come up from the house when they heard the commotion, stood ready to fight in whatever way they could. "Thank you," Lila managed, though the words felt inadequate for what they were offering. "You don't have to do this." "Yeah, we do," Tommy said, checking his rifle with the casual competence of someone who'd grown up on the frontier. "You're one of us now, and we take care of our own." The wait was agonizing. They went through the motions of normal ranch work, but everyone was tense watching the southern horizon for riders that didn't come. Lila baked because she didn't know what else to do with her hands, with her fear. She made bread and rolls and sweet things, and Maggie worked beside her with unusual intensity, as if she could sense the danger gathering like storm clouds. 3 days after the telegram, Maggie did something she hadn't done in 2 years. She was helping Lila shape dinner rolls when her small hand suddenly gripped Lila's wrist with surprising strength. Lila looked down to find Maggie staring at her with dark eyes full of fierce protectiveness. The child's mouth opened, and for a moment nothing came out. Then, rusty with disuse but unmistakably clear, a single word emerged. "Stay." The kitchen went absolutely silent. Sarah dropped the spoon she was holding. Lila's heart stopped beating for one impossible moment. "Maggie?" she whispered. "Stay," Maggie said again, stronger this time. Her small face was set with determination that looked far too old for someone barely 6. "You stay, safe here." Lila dropped to her knees, gathering the child into her arms, while tears streamed down her face. "Oh, sweetness! Oh, my brave girl!" Maggie clung to her, and then she was crying too, great heaving sobs that seemed to carry 2 years of locked-away grief. "Don't go. Don't leave like Mama. Stay." "I'm not going anywhere," Lila promised, even though she had no idea if she could keep that promise. "I'm right here." Caleb appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of his daughter's voice after so long. He froze when he saw them on the floor together, Maggie crying into Lila's shoulder while Lila held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "She spoke," Sarah said unnecessarily, wonder in her voice. Caleb crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and dropped down beside them, wrapping his arms around both Lila and Maggie. They stayed like that, 3 broken people holding each other together, while the bread cooled on the counter and the world outside continued its dangerous turning. "We're going to keep you safe," Caleb said into Lila's hair, and she felt the promise in every tense line of his body. "Both of you. Whatever it takes." Lila wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that love and determination could triumph over Evan's cruelty. But she'd believed in protection before, and it had failed her spectacularly. Still, For Maggie's sake, for this child who'd finally found her voice again, she would try to have faith. That night, as Lila was banking the kitchen fire, she heard horses. Multiple riders coming fast from the south. Her blood went cold. This was it. She ran to find Caleb, but he'd already heard. The hands were moving into position, rifles ready, faces grim in the lamplight. Caleb pulled Lila behind him, one hand on his gun. "Get Maggie and the women into the root cellar," he ordered. "Lock the door and don't come out until I say." "No, I'm not hiding while you fight my battles." "Lila—" "No." She grabbed a kitchen knife, the weight of it familiar in her hand. Not a weapon she wanted to use, but one she would if necessary. "He came for me. I face him." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The riders were in the yard now, 5 of them, and Lila's worst fear crystallized into reality when she recognized the man in front. Evan Rourke sat his horse like a conquering general, his handsome face twisted with the particular rage of someone who'd been defied. He was dressed for the frontier in expensive approximation. New boots, tailored coat, a gun at his hip that probably cost more than most ranchers made in a year. "Lila, darling," he called out, his voice carrying that familiar poisonous sweetness. "There you are. We've been so worried." "Get off my land," Caleb said flatly. Evan's eyes flicked to him with mild interest. "You must be the rancher. Hard, is it?" "I'm Evan Rourke, here to collect something that belongs to me." "Nothing here belongs to you." "I beg to differ. That woman hiding behind you is mine. Cost me a small fortune to keep her fed and clothed for 3 years. I'm simply here to reclaim my property." Lila felt Caleb tense, felt murder coiling in him. She stepped out from behind him before he could do something that would get him killed. "I'm not your property, Evan. I never was." "Oh, sweetheart." Evan smiled, and the expression made her stomach turn. "You'll always be mine. I made you. Everything you are, every skill you have, I gave you that. You can't just steal my investment and expect there to be no consequences." Investment. The word tasted like ash. "You tortured me." "I corrected you. There's a difference." He dismounted with casual grace, and his men followed suit. 4 hired guns against 12 ranch hands, but Evan had always believed charm and money could overcome any odds. "Now, be a good girl and come along. We can discuss your punishment on the way home." "She's not going anywhere with you," Caleb said, and his voice carried a deadly certainty that made even Evan pause. "And you are?" "The man who's going to kill you if you don't leave. Right now." Evan laughed, the sound genuinely amused. "You? A dirt-poor rancher who can't even pay his debts? You think you can threaten me?" He gestured to his men. "I have more guns, more money, more of everything than you'll ever have. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to step aside, I'm going to take what's mine, and if you're smart, you'll accept the generous compensation I'm willing to offer for her room and board these past months." "No," Lila said clearly. "I'm not leaving. I'd rather die than go back to you." Something dangerous flickered in Evan's eyes. "That can be arranged." His hand moved toward his gun, and everything happened at once. Caleb drew faster, but one of Evan's men was faster still. The crack of gunfire split the night, and Lila watched in horror as Caleb staggered, blood blooming across his shoulder. She screamed and lunged forward, but Evan caught her, his grip iron hard on her arm. "See what happens when you make me angry? People get hurt." The ranch hands had their rifles up now, but they were caught in the same terrible calculus: shoot and risk hitting Lila, or hold fire and lose the advantage. Then, from the house, came a sound that froze everyone in place. A child's scream. High, terrified. Unmistakably, Maggie. Lila's world narrowed to that sound. Maggie was supposed to be in the cellar. Maggie was supposed to be safe. But she'd heard the gunshot and thought her father was dead, and now she was running across the yard in her nightgown, screaming for Lila with newly rediscovered words. "Lila! Lila, don't go! Don't leave!" Evan's grip loosened in surprise, and Lila wrenched free. She caught Maggie as the child crashed into her, wrapping her arms around that small, trembling body. "I've got you," she whispered fiercely. "I've got you." Evan stared at them, something calculating entering his expression. "Well, isn't this interesting? You've gotten attached. "Ugh, leave her out of this," Lila said, pushing Maggie behind her. "This is between us." "Nothing is ever just between us, darling. You should know that by now." He took a step closer, and Lila saw the malice glittering in his eyes. "I wonder how much pain I'd have to cause that child before you came willingly. How many screams before you remembered who you belonged to?" White-hot rage replaced Lila's fear. "You touch her, and I'll kill you myself." "There's my girl. I knew the fire was still there." Evan smiled. "Come with me now, and I'll leave them all unharmed. Fight, and I'll burn this ranch to the ground with everyone in it." Lila felt Maggie's hands fisting in her skirt, felt the child's terror vibrating through her small frame, felt Caleb's eyes on her even as he bled into the mud, felt the weight of every person on this ranch who'd chosen to stand with her against this moment, and she made her choice. "No." The single word hung in the cold air like a declaration of war. Evan's face transformed, the mask of charm cracking to reveal the monster beneath. "What did you say?" "I said no." Lila's voice was steady, despite the fear threatening to choke her. "I'm not going with you. I'm not your property. I never was." "You ungrateful—" Evan lunged forward, hand raised to strike, but he never completed the motion. Caleb, bleeding and furious, hit him like a freight train. They went down in a tangle of limbs and rage, fists connecting with sickening thuds. Evan's men moved to intervene but found themselves facing 12 rifle barrels held by people who'd learned to shoot before they could write. "I wouldn't," Hewitt said conversationally, his aim never wavering. "Unless you're real eager to die in Montana mud." The hired guns froze, hands hovering over their weapons. They were professionals who understood odds, and these odds had just shifted dramatically against them. In the yard, Caleb and Evan fought with the vicious intensity of men who had nothing left to lose. Evan was faster, trained in some Eastern boxing academy, but Caleb fought like the frontier had taught him, dirty, relentless, and without mercy. He drove his fist into Evan's ribs, his knee into his gut, fighting through the pain of his wounded shoulder with pure hatred fueling every blow. "You don't—" Caleb punctuated each word with a strike. "Touch. What's mine?" Evan managed to land a blow that split Caleb's lip, then went for his gun. But Lila was faster. She kicked it away, sending it skittering across the frozen mud, and Evan's eyes found hers with such pure malice that she actually stepped back. "You'll regret this," he spat, blood running from his nose. "I'll destroy everything you care about. I'll make you watch while I—" He never finished the threat. Caleb's fist connected with his jaw with a crack that echoed across the yard, and Evan went down hard, unconscious, before he hit the ground. The sudden silence was deafening. Caleb stood over Evan's prone form, breathing hard, blood dripping from his knuckles and shoulder. He swayed slightly, and Lila rushed forward to steady him. "You're bleeding." "Doesn't matter." But he leaned into her support, his weight reminding her that he was still human, despite the fury that had turned him into something elemental. "Maggie?" "I'm here, Papa." The small voice was shaky but clear. Maggie had been standing frozen throughout the fight, but now she moved to her father's side, her small hand finding his. "You're hurt." "I'm okay, little one." He touched her hair with his bloodied hand, gentle despite everything. "I'm okay." "What do we do with them?" Hewitt asked, gesturing to Evan and his men with his rifle. "Tie them up. We'll take them to the marshal in Silver Ridge come morning." Caleb's voice was rough with pain and exhaustion. "Let the law handle it." "The law won't do anything," Lila said quietly, reality crashing back now that the immediate danger had passed. "I told you. He has connections, lawyers. He'll be free before the week is out." "Not if I have anything to say about it." The voice came from the darkness beyond the lamplight, and everyone turned to see a well-dressed man stepping forward, a notebook in his hand. "Gerald Chambers, territorial correspondent for the Chicago Tribune. I've been following Mr. Rourke for 3 months now." Lila stared at him in confusion. "What?" "Evan Rourke is a very wealthy man, Miss Mercer. Also a very dangerous one. The Tribune has been investigating him for assault, fraud, and suspicion of murder in the death of a young woman last year, one who bore a striking resemblance to you." Chambers flipped through his notebook. "When the report of your death came through, it had all the hallmarks of his previous work. But bodies have a way of surfacing eventually, and when yours didn't, I suspected you might have been cleverer than he gave you credit for. You've been following me, following the story. You just happen to be the most important part of it. He gestured to Evan's unconscious form. I have 3 years of documented evidence against him. Witnesses willing to testify, financial records that prove fraud, and now, thanks to tonight's little performance, assault with intent to kidnap. That's federal jurisdiction, Miss Mercer. His Chicago lawyers won't be able to touch him. Hope, fragile and terrifying, unfurled in Lila's chest. You can really put him away? With your testimony? Absolutely. He threatened you, threatened a child, and attempted kidnapping across state lines. Add that to everything else, and he'll be lucky to see daylight again before he's an old man. Chambers smiled grimly. The Tribune loves nothing more than exposing rich men who think they're above the law. This story will make front-page news for weeks. Evan groaned, consciousness returning. His eyes opened, focused on Chambers, and something like fear flickered across his face for the first time. You, he rasped. Me, Chambers agreed pleasantly. Hello, Evan. Did you enjoy your journey west? I certainly enjoyed documenting every threat you made, every law you broke getting here. The federal marshal is waiting in Silver Ridge to take custody. I believe they're quite interested in discussing your various business dealings. This is entrapment. This is justice. There's a difference. Chambers turned to Caleb. Mr. Hart, I'll need Miss Mercer to make a formal statement. Would tomorrow morning be acceptable? Caleb nodded, swaying again. Lila tightened her grip on him, feeling the sticky warmth of blood soaking through his shirt. He needs a doctor, she said urgently. Sarah's already gone for Doc Morrison, Hewitt reported. Should be here within the hour. They got Caleb into the house and seated at the kitchen table while Lila worked to strip away his shirt and examine the wound. The bullet had gone through the meat of his shoulder, missing bone and major blood vessels, but leaving a ragged hole that bled freely. You're lucky, she said, though her hands shook as she pressed clean towels against the injury. Don't feel lucky. But he managed to smile for Maggie, who was hovering anxiously nearby. Just feels like I got shot. Don't joke, Maggie said seriously, her newly rediscovered voice still rusty but gaining strength. You could have died. But I didn't, and neither did Lila. That's what matters. Outside, the hands were securing Evan and his men in the barn under heavy guard. Inside, Lila cleaned Caleb's wound with whiskey that made him hiss through his teeth, then bandaged it with strips of clean cotton while Maggie held the lamp steady. You fought for me, Lila said quietly, not quite able to meet his eyes. Of course I did. You could have been killed. So could you. Would have been if you'd gone with him. Caleb caught her hand, stilling her nervous movements. I meant what I said out there. You're mine to protect now. If that bothers you, if it sounds too much like what he said, tell me and I'll find different words. But the sentiment stays the same. You're part of this family, part of my life, and I protect what's mine. Lila's eyes burned with unshed tears. It doesn't sound the same. When you say it, it sounds like choice instead of prison. It is choice. Always choice. You can leave tomorrow if you want, and I'll help you go wherever you need to be safe. But if you stay, his voice roughened. If you stay, I want it to be because you want to be here, want to be with us, not because you're afraid to be anywhere else. I want to stay. The words came out barely above a whisper, but they carried the weight of absolute truth. I want to wake up in this kitchen every morning and make bread with Maggie. I want to watch the ranch thrive because we built something good together. I want... She faltered, then pushed forward. I want you. This life, this family, if you'll have me. Caleb's good hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped despite her best efforts. Lila Mercer, I'd be honored to have you, in whatever way you're willing to be had. All the ways, she managed, laughing through tears. I want all of it. He kissed her then, gentle despite the violence that still hummed in his blood, careful of her scars and his wounds and the fragile hope they were building between them. Maggie made a small sound of happiness and wrapped her arms around both of them, creating a circle of three that felt unbreakable despite how recently it had been formed. Does this mean Lila's staying forever? Maggie asked when they finally broke apart. If she wants to, Caleb said, looking at Lila with an expression that made her heart stutter. I want to, Lila confirmed, gathering Maggie close. Forever sounds exactly right. Doc Morrison arrived and pronounced Caleb fortunate but foolish, dosed him with laudanum for the pain, and ordered him to rest for a week. Caleb ignored the rest order by morning, insisting on accompanying Lila and Chambers to Silver Ridge to give their statements to the federal marshal. The marshal was a no-nonsense woman named Catherine Ross, who'd seen enough frontier justice to be unimpressed by Chicago money. She took their statements with meticulous care, examined Chambers' evidence, and assured them that Evan Rourke would stand trial for his crimes. Federal court, probably in Helena, she said, making notes in her ledger. You'll need to testify, Miss Mercer. Can you do that? Lila thought about facing Evan in a courtroom, about speaking publicly about the things he'd done to her. The old fear rose up, but it was weaker now, diluted by the knowledge that she wasn't alone anymore. I can do it. Good. Because men like him need to learn they can't terrorize women without consequences. Marshal Ross looked up, her expression fierce. I'll make sure he never touches you again. That's a promise. The trial took place in late April, just as the prairie was exploding into wildflower bloom. Lila traveled to Helena with Caleb and Maggie, the whole ranch sending them off with enough bread and good wishes to sustain an army. The courtroom was packed. Chambers had done his job well, and the story of the Chicago millionaire who'd terrorized a frontier baker had captured the territory's imagination. Lila sat in the witness box wearing her best dress, hands folded to hide their shaking, and told the truth. All of it. The burns, the beatings, the systematic destruction of her sense of self. The night she'd faked her death because dying seemed safer than staying. The months of hiding, of learning to be human again in a kitchen that smelled like yeast and possibility. Evan's lawyers tried to paint her as a thief, a liar, a woman of loose morals who'd taken advantage of their client's generosity. But Chambers had done his homework. He produced witnesses, other women Evan had hurt, business partners he'd defrauded. A damning pattern of violence that stretched back years. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Evan Rourke was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. When the bailiffs led him away, he looked at Lila with such hatred that she felt it like a physical blow. But Caleb was beside her, his hand warm in hers, and Maggie was gripping her other hand with fierce protectiveness, and Evan's hatred couldn't touch her anymore. She was free. They were married in June, in the kitchen where they'd fallen in love over bread dough and ledger books. It was a small ceremony, just the ranch family and a few friends from town, but it was perfect. Lila wore a simple blue dress that Sarah had helped her sew, and Caleb wore his Sunday best with his arm still in a sling from the shoulder wound. Maggie stood between them during the vows, holding both their hands, and when the traveling preacher pronounced them married, she was the first to cheer. We're a family now, she announced to anyone who would listen. A real forever family. We were already a family, Lila corrected gently. The wedding just makes it official. Does this mean I can call you Mama? Lila's throat closed with emotion. If you want to. I want to, Maggie hugged her fiercely. You're the best Mama, better than bread, even better than cinnamon rolls. High praise indeed, Caleb said, grinning. The ranch thrived through that summer and into fall. The bread business continued to grow, and Lila hired 3 more women from town, creating jobs and community in equal measure. The breeding program Caleb had invested in began paying dividends, and by autumn they'd paid off the bank completely and started turning actual profit. Pritchard made one last attempt to buy them out in September, sending his foreman with an even higher offer. Caleb sent him back with a simple message. Not for sale. Not now, not ever. The foreman reported that Pritchard hadn't taken it well, but without the leverage of Caleb's debt, there was nothing he could do. Hart Ranch was safe, thriving, and completely out of his reach. Winter came again, but this time it found the ranch prepared. Full larders, healthy stock, and a kitchen that had become the heart of not just the ranch, but the whole community. People traveled hours just to buy Lila's bread, and many stayed to hear the story of how love and determination had saved a failing ranch. On a morning in late November, Lila woke to find Maggie standing beside the bed, her face split with an enormous grin. Mama, come quick! Something's happening! Lila followed her down to the kitchen, where Caleb was making coffee with the clumsy, one-handed efficiency of someone whose shoulder was still healing. He looked up when they entered, his expression soft with the kind of happiness that came from waking up beside someone you loved. "Morning, wife." "Morning, husband." The words still felt new and wonderful on her tongue. "What's this about something happening?" "Look outside," Maggie urged, tugging her toward the window. Lila looked. The yard was full of people, at least 50, maybe more, all holding baskets and bundles. As she watched in confusion, they began to unload lumber, tools, bags of nails. "What? Barn raising," Caleb said, coming up behind her and wrapping his good arm around her waist. "The old barn is falling apart, and we need a bigger one anyway for the expanded operation. I mentioned it to Hewitt last week, and he apparently told everyone within 100 miles. We can't afford. We're not paying. They're volunteering." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Turns out when you build something good, people want to help you keep building it." Tears stung Lila's eyes as she watched the community come together. Chen and his extended family, Sarah and her children, families from town who'd bought bread and stayed for the story. Even Marshall Ross had come, hammer in hand and ready to work. "This is because of you," Caleb murmured. "You made this ranch worth saving, made it worth being part of." "We did it together." "Yeah, we did." They spent the day working alongside their neighbors, raising walls and beams while children ran underfoot, and Lila and the kitchen women fed everyone from a makeshift outdoor kitchen. By sunset, the barn's skeleton stood proud against the darkening sky, and the air rang with laughter and satisfaction. "Tomorrow we'll finish the roof," Hewitt announced. "Then comes the real work, painting it." "What color?" someone called out. Maggie didn't hesitate. "Red, bright red like Mama's best bread crust." The crowd laughed, and someone suggested naming the new structure the Bread Barn in honor of what had saved the ranch. The name stuck. That night, after the neighbors had departed and the ranch had settled into comfortable, exhausted silence, Lila stood in her kitchen, their kitchen, and took stock of everything that had changed in 1 year. She'd arrived with nothing but a carpet bag and a borrowed name, running from a past that had nearly destroyed her. Now she had a home, a family, a community that valued her for what she could build rather than what she could survive. She had Maggie, who chattered constantly now, making up for 2 years of silence with an endless stream of observations and questions and declarations of love. She had Caleb, who looked at her like she was the answer to prayers he'd stopped believing anyone heard. She had purpose, safety, and the freedom to want things without fear that wanting would lead to pain. "Thinking deep thoughts?" Caleb asked, appearing in the doorway. "Just counting my blessings." "Find many?" "More than I ever imagined possible." She turned to face him, this man who'd fought for her, bled for her, chosen her when she'd given him every reason to send her away. "I love you. I don't think I've said that properly yet." "You've shown it every day." He crossed to her, pulling her close despite the lingering ache in his shoulder. "But I like hearing it too." "I love you," she repeated, the words easier the second time. "I love Maggie. I love this ranch and this life, and waking up every morning knowing I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." "Good. Because I love you too. So much it terrifies me sometimes." "Terrified is better than numb?" "Terrified is infinitely better than numb." He kissed her, slow and deep, and Lila felt the last of her scars begin to heal from the inside out. Upstairs, Maggie was already asleep, her room full of small treasures and the security of knowing her parents were downstairs and would still be there in the morning. Outside, the bread barn stood skeletal but beautiful against the stars, a monument to what community and determination could build. And in the kitchen, dough was already rising for tomorrow's bread, patient and faithful, transforming in the darkness the same way Lila herself had transformed, from broken to whole, from running to staying, from surviving to living. The spring brought news that made the whole territory celebrate. Evan Rourke had lost his final appeal. 20 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole. Lila received the telegram and felt the last ghost of fear finally release its grip on her heart. "It's really over," she told Caleb that night. "It's really over. I can stop looking over my shoulder now. You could have stopped months ago. I would have protected you." I know, but now I don't need protecting. Now I'm just free. And she was. Free to build the life she wanted, to love without fear, to be loved in return without wondering when the punishment would come. By summer, she was pregnant. The news sent Maggie into paroxysms of joy at the prospect of becoming a big sister, and Caleb into a state of nervous excitement that made the hands tease him mercilessly. Never seen a man so scared of a baby, Hewitt observed. I'm not scared of the baby. I'm scared of something happening to Lila. She's stronger than you think. I know exactly how strong she is. That's what terrifies me. But Lila sailed through pregnancy with the same competent determination she brought to everything else. She baked until the morning her water broke, much to Sarah's consternation, and delivered a healthy baby boy on a clear October morning. They named him Daniel, after Caleb's grandfather who'd built the ranch from nothing. Maggie, now 7 and full of opinions, declared him perfect despite his tendency to cry at inconvenient moments. She appointed herself his chief guardian, and woe to anyone who tried to hold him without her approval. He's my brother, she informed the hands sternly. You have to be gentle. Yes, ma'am, they chorused, hiding smiles. The years passed in a blur of seasons and bread dough and children growing like wildflowers. Daniel was followed by twin girls, Emma and Grace, who inherited their mother's stubborn determination and their father's storm cloud eyes. The ranch expanded. The bread barn became legendary throughout the territory, and people traveled from 3 states over just to taste what Lila and her growing team of bakers produced. But it was never just about bread. It was about what bread represented: transformation, community, the patient work of creating something nourishing from simple ingredients. It was about taking the raw and broken and making it whole through time and care and faith in the process. Lila trained dozens of women over the years, teaching them not just baking, but business, giving them skills and confidence to build their own futures. Some stayed on at the ranch, others left to open bakeries in distant towns, carrying the lessons forward. You're changing the world, one loaf at a time, Caleb told her once. I'm just making bread. You're making hope. There's a difference. On Lila's 40th birthday, the territory threw her a celebration that drew hundreds. The barn was decorated with ribbons and wildflowers. Tables groaned under the weight of food, and person after person stood up to tell stories about how Heart Ranch bread had sustained them through hard times. This woman saved our ranch, one farmer said, taught my wife to bake, and now we sell bread alongside our crops. We would have lost everything without her. She gave me a job when no one else would hire a widow, Sarah added, gave me dignity and purpose, and showed me I was worth more than I thought. Maggie, now 17 and beautiful, stood to speak last. My mother died when I was 4, and I thought I'd never feel safe again. Then Lila came, and she didn't try to replace my mama. She just loved me anyway, made me bread and pulled me from nightmares and showed me that family isn't just blood, it's who shows up when you scream. There wasn't a dry eye in the barn. That night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Lila and Caleb sat on the porch watching stars wheel overhead. Any regrets? He asked, lacing his fingers through hers. About what? Running to Montana, staying when it was hard, building this life instead of something easier. Lila thought about the girl she'd been, terrified, broken, convinced she deserved nothing better than Evan's cruelty. Then she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, loved, surrounded by family and community she'd helped build. Not a single one, she said finally. Every hard thing led me here. To you, to this family, to a life I couldn't have imagined when I stepped off that train with nothing but a carpet bag and hope. Just hope? And really good bread recipes. He laughed, and the sound was warm and free, nothing like the grief-hardened man she'd met that first day. The bread recipes definitely helped. They did, didn't they? She leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable with the silence between them. After 20 years of marriage, they'd learned that some things didn't need words. A light flickered on in the kitchen. Through the window, they could see Daniel, now 12 and tall for his age, sneaking down to practice the bread shaping Lila had been teaching him. He moved with her same precise care, checking his work against the mental standards she'd instilled. He's going to be better than me, Lila observed. Impossible, but he'll be good. You say that about all of them. Because it's true. You and Maggie built something here that's going to outlast both of us. The bread is just the beginning. Lila watched her son work, patient and focused, and felt the satisfaction of seeing her legacy taking root, not in empire or wealth, but in the quiet competence of the next generation learning to create something good. "I got a letter today," she said after a while. "From the federal prison in Illinois." Caleb tensed. "Evan?" "Dead. Heart failure, apparently. The warden thought I should know." "How do you feel?" Lila examined her heart carefully, looking for the fear and hatred that had lived there for so long. She found only a distant pity for a man who'd had everything and ruined it through cruelty and control. "I feel free," she said. "Really, truly free. Not because he's dead, but because I've built something so good that his death barely matters. He's been irrelevant to my life for 20 years. This just makes it official." "Good." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "You deserve to be free of him. Deserve to be happy." "I am happy, deliriously, impossibly happy." She turned to look at him in the starlight. "Thank you for fighting for me, for believing I was worth fighting for when I didn't believe it myself. You made it easy." His smile was soft in the darkness. "You were always worth fighting for. You just needed someone to show you." Inside, Daniel finished his bread and set it to rise, covered with a clean cloth just like his mother had taught him. Tomorrow it would bake golden and perfect, and the whole family would eat it warm with butter and honey, continuing a tradition that had saved them all. Home was bread rising in the darkness. Home was a child learning to create. Home was a hand in yours and a life built through patient work and stubborn hope. Home was here, and it always would be. And as the stars turned overhead and the prairie wind whispered through the grass, Lila Mercer Hart, baker, wife, mother, and the woman who'd turned bread into salvation, closed her eyes and felt completely, perfectly content. The silence that had once defined her was gone forever, replaced by laughter and voices and the constant hum of a life well lived. And somewhere in the kitchen, in the darkness before dawn, new bread began to rise.